Yeah, yeah. Making her way to the mic. They start dimming the lights. You start feeling alright. From Birmingham, home of the Teddy Longs and the Ruben Studders. More once you discover. For all of the lovers, Whitney Houston and Roman Reigns. For all of the lovers, and Mickey James and Marvin Gaye. For all of the lovers, and Sasha Banks, Janelle Monáe, Silk, Sonic, and Paige. Allow me to say, look, I just found a place, sweet escape for every one of us. I was kinda late, I just made it off the struggle bus. Walking by the faith, cause I know it's right in front of us. Yo, I ain't with the hate, gotta focus on what's great. Ladies and gentlemen, Steph Hardy is on the air. Had to drop a couple bars just to make you all aware. So, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. You know I go by Joe or the rest of the flow, yeah.
Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to the season 5 premiere of the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with your girl, Stephanie Hardy. I am so glad to be back. It's been a while, but of course, you know, your girl has been under construction. She's been trying to build the show up to be something that people want to watch and also listen to at the same time. So that's why I've been gone for so long, and I've been traveling too. So basically in the midst of all of that, I'm here. We're back. The show is back. The reel is back. Thank goodness we are here. Thank you all so much for your support. Thank you for joining me on this Wednesday night. And of course, if you want to join the conversation, hop in the comments wherever you're watching from Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and also for the first time on Twitch. If you're watching from there, please comment and talk about it, with us and everything, and tell us, what you like about our interview and stuff like that. But I am sitting here with a very special person to start off. She and I work together on Women's Wrestling Talk, the number one women's wrestling show on the planet. She is also a host and content creator in her own right with her network called In Cat We Trust. And she's also so many other different things, including a strong woman, a mother, an author, and all of the different things. I know her as Kat, but I'm going to introduce her to everyone on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast as Katrina Blake. Kat, how are you? And welcome to the Hardy Wrestling Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm okay. It's been a bit of a week already, but I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for asking me on.
Of course, because it's like since we've been working together, it's just like there's so much about you that I feel like the world needs to know. And and my listeners deserve to know too, because it's just like we've been working so closely together over the past couple of months, whether it be online for our after shows or even like in person in New York from the past couple of months. Like we really have been, with each other. So honestly, I was just like in making my list of people who I would want to my show, like you were basically, on the top of the list. So I'm
Oh,
glad we were able to have this time together. So I'm really happy. But let's go into it. And I'm gonna ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, and that's when did you fall in love with wrestling?
uh, well, for me, it was when I was pretty young. Actually, I want to say probably by the age of like 5 or 6. My grandma was a really, really huge wrestling fan. She used to watch it. My mom didn't watch it too much, but my grandmother really like watched it hard, and she used to get so excited, especially about Macho Man was like her guy. She loved his like theatrics. She loved like when he got and started talking to promos. Sometimes she was like, it didn't really necessarily always make sense, but it worked for her that she got excited enough, and so I started watching with her and my twin brother, and then uh, saw Shawn Michaels for the first time, and I was like, I'm young, but it was like, oh my god, he's like so like everything to me. You're young, and everything is like life and death when you're that young, and so I had to watch everything he was on, and he was just so over the top and so extra that I loved it. And then kind of calmed down a bit, and then I saw the Hardys for the first time. But like, and I liked Matt at first for like a very small period of time, but then Jeff flipped off for the very first time, and I was like, listen, you guys, like, look at this, like he's doing this craziness, and he's like the long hair and the green eyes, and that was it. And so it was obsessive at that point where it was like, again, life or death, had to watch everything they were on, had to have like every magazine they were on. I recorded, I guess, revealing my age here. If anybody remember, like taking a VHS with a blank videotape and recording stuff off TVs, I definitely done that with Jeff Hardy matches. It was bad. But yeah, that's kind of for me how it really started, honestly, with my grandma.
Yeah, and that's something we kind of have in common. Even though my dad was the one who really started it for me, it all started with my grandma as well because she would sneak out and go to various wrestling events, at the Boutwell Auditorium here in Birmingham and stuff. So it was her, and then it skipped all of my aunties and went straight to my dad, and then it went straight to me. And you're not dating yourself by saying, the whole VHS thing, like, because it's just like I remember clearly because the way my dad up with the Monday Night War would be to tape. So it's just like that's not, completely dating yourself at all. Like I totally get that. So he had like a mountain of tapes at a time because he would have to work and catch things later. But still, like I totally get that. And the thing about the Hardys though, it's just like there's just something about us. We're just so enthralling. Like we're just exciting. You just can't help but to just, watch us and watch everything we do because we're fascinating and we're cool. So I love that the Hardy brothers, but specifically Jeff, was kind of the one that did it for you, even though it was Matt for a minute. Usually for a lot of people, it's always Jeff. I don't know what it is, but it's just like it's always Jeff for people. Like it's just hysterical to me how a lot of people sort of gravitate more towards him than they do towards Matt. But that's just how it is sometimes. So I'm glad that that's kind of how you got started and it was a family thing. But you sort of found your own way with it and your own identity as a fan as well. So outside of the Hardys, who were some of your favorites, growing up, and are they still your favorites today?
Uh, Again, Shawn Michaels was definitely one of my favorites. The Hardy Boys. I was a really huge fan of Eddie Guerrero. He used to do like the shenanigans, but it worked with him. Like I like the whole lie. He used to get me bad because he'd do stuff, but I was such a fan. He was such a great wrestler, and I felt like even as I got older, it was like I don't even know if he was appreciated as much as he probably should have been. I was a fan of China Jackie, Lita, of course, because I told people she was like semi tomboy, which is kind of how I was, and so it's like I was girly, but I also hated wearing dresses, still do. Uh, and so like the whole like or I won't wear a thong. Power to her that she was able to pull that off and be comfortable. Because me, I'm like, can't be having that happening back there. But the fact that she was very tomboyish and then she was able to like her Corona off stuff and kind of hang with, the guys. For me, especially not being like how China was more like bigger in stature. For me was everything. And like over the years, I wound up to I liked John Cena for a period. Probably when he started with the "You Can't See Me" stuff, like not when he was really rapping John Cena, because that really irritated me when he was not John Cena. But when he started being more like how he kind of is now, it's like okay, he's not too bad. I liked him. Uh, there's been like people who I've grown to appreciate as I've gotten older, like certain people who are good as heels, like Randy Orton, who used to irritate me. I was always mad at him all the time. He used to make me so upset, and or Edge used to make me so upset because I'm like, why are you doing this to my guys or whatever? The Rock, who I actually was a big fan of because he was so like extra, like who talks about himself in the third person and do it without being annoying, and he does it third person, or Stone Cold, being Stone Cold and people playing off like The Rock always overselling the Stunner, and it worked so well because it's always over the top. So stuff like that was kind of like my favorites, and I'm still fans of them now. As far as like current wrestlers, Bianca, clearly that's my girl. Love her. Asuka. You have like Carmelo Hayes, who then Roman Reigns. My guy will be some Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre. So there's like people who I do like now, but I always bring it back to if it wasn't for Shawn Michaels for the first time and it wasn't for Jeff Hardy, almost hurting himself that time I saw him for the first time, I probably wouldn't be a wrestling fan now.
Yeah, those are pretty solid people that you mentioned. And also with the women, you mentioned China, you mentioned Lita, you mentioned Jacqueline, and even now in the present day where you have Bianca Belair and so many other women that are, tearing the house down. And, you have women of the past who, like Lita and like China, who tore the house down for women like Bianca to sort of rise and be who they are. So you have a really solid, list of favorites there. So I really appreciate that, within your fandom. So, speaking of your fandom, since you started, relatively young as a wrestling fan, did you ever face any obstacles with being a fan or any like type of bullying from people who may not have understood why you were a wrestling fan or felt like you should not have been a wrestling fan because they felt like it was dumb? Like, did you ever face that early on and how did you rise above that?
Not really. Like it's a weird thing because I tell people all the time I was definitely a nerd. In regards to like how I was about my grades, I was really funny about having to have a certain grade. I would get really upset with myself if I didn't, and so I was nerdy in that regard. And I liked like books. I was like a person who always had a book and was like people was doing everything else. I'm reading off in a corner somewhere, and where it was like 2 and 3 books sometimes at a time. And so for me, wrestling wasn't too far off of that when it necessarily fit in the normal because while I embraced the like adults were like, oh, I love books. So like a lot of the times when you were, at least when I was younger, people made fun of people who like to read, which I thought was really odd. But there was that weird thing like, oh, you like reading, and I'm like, yes, I love reading, and it was always like, were you trying to be like smart? I'm like, I'm not trying, or like the really weird thing where it was always kind of put in as if I was trying to act white, which I never understood only because I've always been smarter than the people that I've met. And this is not, again, to equate any other person. It's just for people that I've met, I've usually was smarter than them. And so it was really weird, like, comparing that, like, oh, you're acting white. And I'm like, oh, I just like to read. Just that. Or, I like learning things. My mom was somebody who always knew things and would just randomly tell me and my siblings stuff. And that like, schools wouldn't even teach. You just randomly was like, oh, I found this out. And would just tell us. And so that's stuff I retained. And so I liked that kind of stuff. So wrestling wasn't really too far off because a lot of the people I went to, especially like junior high school when the whole DX thing was like really at its peak, with the suck it and everything, all the boys were doing that nonsense. And so they were all in that. And so I was part of it in that regard. Now, while I was a nerd and everything, I definitely was part of the wrestling because we liked wrestling. And who didn't like The Rock back then? Like I had a friend in high school who swore he was like The Rock's long lost brother and talked about himself also in the third person. And so he would go around, and this is high school, talking about himself in third person and like carrying his like title or like he had the hair like trying to make his hair like the Rock and the Hawaiian shirts the Rock used to wear. And so for me it was like this is pretty normal, like because for the most part, while they were obviously though you want to call them the jocks, I don't know if I'll call them that, are the ones who was more like popular, it was also still, me being around other people who liked it. So I don't think it really was like I've never really had an issue with I feel like maybe as an adult mostly because people are like, oh, you still watch wrestling? And I'm like, well, yeah, like I'm entertained. I still watch it, and so it is like probably weird comments like that, like from people who don't watch it at all, who's like, oh, you haven't outgrown wrestling, and I'm like, no, I haven't outgrown wrestling, and so, but I've never actually had that really of an issue as like growing up or anything.
Yeah, I find a lot of the time people sort of look at you like you're crazy more when you're an adult and you say you still like wrestling, or they think it's fascinating because, deep down inside they like it too, but they never really felt like encouraged to really like say it out loud. But then you have other people who just kind of look at you like you're crazy, like, oh my god, you still watch that, or it's fake, or it's for kids and all this other stuff. And I'm just looking like that may be true, but the reason why kids are able to see half the stuff is because the adults let them watch it, so chill out. But it's really cool that while you were in high school or even while you were in school period, there was like like a community of children who were still okay with liking wrestling and doing all the crazy, trends of the time and stuff like that. But I do hate that you were sort of teased in a sense for being smart or for reading a whole lot. That's something that I've gone through myself as well. Like I was made fun of in high school because I read newspapers. Like I read newspapers and people thought that made me like an old lady, and I was just like, huh? No, it doesn't. Why would you say that? Like, but either way, people tease you for things, but at the same time, it's like you have to be true to yourself. And it's clear that you felt a sense of comfortability in being true to yourself, regardless of what anybody else was doing on the outside, whether they were into wrestling or not. You were still very, steadfast in who you were, and you did not, waver in that. And that's cool. That's really cool. I like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So did you ever imagine yourself working in the wrestling business, as you were growing up? And or did you have a completely different plan for your life?
No, definitely never thought I would be working in wrestling. I tell people all the time when I was younger, I had this, I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to work criminal law. I was going to be a prosecutor. I was going to be arresting all these criminals who like hurt children and women and like did such crimes. I was ready. Like, couldn't tell me I wasn't going to be like this super badass lawyer. And while my other go back was writing, and I said, well, I don't know how realistic I can, at the time, I'm like 15, 14, 15. I don't know how realistic I can make the writing thing. The singing, I wanted to sing at one point too, but then I was like, oh, I don't like people. I don't like singing in front of people. And then I was like, touring, like I gotta do this for people, and this, so that went out the window. I was like, okay, no, this clearly singing is only meant for me to be at home when nobody can really hear me sing. And so that went out the window. But the lawyer thing was something I truly, truly wanted to do. But then I became a mom, and so I had her like before 20, not like I was 19. So I had her, and I was like, okay, well, life kind of changes now, and it's like, what do you kind of figure out, what do you want to do now, knowing you try to at least be a good mom, if anything else. And all the lawyers I've ever met has always been like, your hours are not your own. And so you're in the office way longer than most people when you're in law. And criminal law is even worse, apparently. And so it's like, do I have time to work 70-hour work weeks and still be a good mom? And so I went back to school, and I wound up getting. I do have a degree in law. Actually, that was one of the first things I got once I got kind of settled, and then I got my second degree a little bit after I had my other kids, and I did it online, but I got that, and that's in actually developmental psychology. So I have two degrees which I don't use. So I have them, and it was a completely roundabout way of you make a choice and you kind of have to deal with the consequences, and so no, I never thought I would be doing wrestling in this manner. It was just like um, it worked out the way it worked out. I guess like the writing, I've been doing writing for a long time, professionally fictional writing since 2014, and so that wasn't too far of a stretch to kind of do wrestling writing because like I like wrestling and writing is like easy for me, and so I can do that. But then, as I've mentioned previously, with like the whole quarantine and COVID really kind of threw me off a bit. There's like a lot of stuff happening in my personal life, and it was just I was in a really bad, like depressing state where I just wasn't happy. And so it's like I didn't really write anymore. I wasn't even reading anymore. Like the things I would normally do wasn't really giving me any like happiness, but wrestling did. And so I was like, oh, let's watch some random wrestling match for like so long ago. Let's watch it. Like, oh, I love this. And so me doing that kind of helped. And I was like, you know what? Let me just randomly, we're all kind of stuck at home. Let me see if I can get somebody to show on a podcast. Of somebody I met in 2019 at a wrestling show. It's like, yeah, sure, we cool. We could just jump on a podcast. And so because we had that conversation and it was super just a regular conversation, and people was like, you talk to people, not like reporting, like you kind of talk to them. I'm like, well, I would hope if I'm calling you a friend, that I wouldn't feel like it's a jobby if I'm talking to you. Like it would feel like a conversation. And so that happened. And then I got a couple of other people during that time, during the quarantine, that I interviewed, like Tristan Ty, he was a Kuro Kwan on MLW, Primal Fear, Ring of Honor. And that was, again, just to share the fact that me and Gabe from Primal Fear happened to like horror movies. And I was like, horror movies is my jam. I love horror movies all year round. There's no Halloween. It's all year, every day, background noise, go to sleep with it on, that kind of stuff. And so those couple of interviews, people being really nice about the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing, and why I always try to get good questions and always research. It was always still like I don't really like talking. I don't really like seeing myself on camera. I don't really like hearing my voice. And so they were okay with me knowing like, listen, I might question, I might doubt myself a lot, but they were very patient about it, and it wound up spurring into all of this as far as like working with Popular Review for a certain period of time, and then leaving that, and which was a whole bunch of nonsense with that, and then wind up doing my own thing, and it wound up becoming this. And it's always like insane because I would have never, if you would have asked me this even 5 years ago, I'm like, wrestling, man, no. Like, I'll watch it. I'll go to shows. I'll have a good time with my friends. But I did not expect myself to be interviewing anybody or backstage anywhere or in a ring announcing anything when I hate public speaking. Never would have thought it.
So you have a law degree, a psych degree, like you have multiple law degrees. So basically, if anyone is watching Law and Order or any cop show and they have no clue what's going on from a legal point of view, or say a show like How to Get Away with Murder, you would know how to find your way through it.
Yeah, I was just saying a few days ago, it might have been on Sunday or something, and I was watching something with Max, and I was like, "Oh my god, this person is so stupid! You never do this." And I was like, "I know it sounds really bad that I know this, but you never do this unless you want to get caught." And I'm like, as bad as that sounds, I'm like, but common sense is like, come on, I watch. Let's be smart about this. If you're gonna do a crime, at least be smart about doing crime. And so yeah, it sounds bad. I was thinking out loud again, but unfortunately, yes, I usually do know a lot of things because I'm like big. I was big on wanting to be a criminal law, which is why probably the reason why I watch true crime stuff now is because it's just like I always wanted to do it, and besides I can't. It's like I get a little fixed when watching my true crime or watching my the stuff that I watch, and I don't even watch Law and Order like that, but I did watch like Criminal Minds, and it was always like fascinated with how they got to where they decided who the suspect was, and to me that was always like because you have to work psychology in that too, and so for me, it's like both of these things are things I wanted to do at one point. And so for me, it's just like a little bit of it in the fiction because I can't do it actual like in real life. So yeah.
That is amazing. And then on top of that, it's just that it seemed like when you did start in wrestling, you kind of just wanted to go into it, and still do your best by it, even though you knew you weren't really entirely comfortable with the idea of being on camera, but you still wanted to apply what you did know to the wrestling, even with your writing and even with your hosting. Like you still tried to push through, some of your uncomfortabilities. And that's something that I can totally identify with because I know I didn't necessarily plan on doing anything like this either. I didn't know if anyone would ever want to listen to me or find me engaging enough, to listen to me. And half the time I feel like, oh my God, I'm an amateur, I can't do this. But then half the time, really all it is just, applying what you already know or searching for what you don't know and applying that, to this new thing that you're doing, and then you actually find that you're better at it than you thought you would be. So I think that that's, essentially something else that we have in common. And I think that that's really cool though, because yeah, we both like had no clue that this was going to be in the cards, but either way, we're still taking it and we're running with it as best as we can. So in doing research on you, which I really didn't have to do as much, but I still did, for the sake of this interview, you, of course, worked as a host on Unpopular Review, which is hosted by our friends Bad Guy Jack and Shay Sawyer as of now. And you also worked on Extreme Virtual Pro Wrestling Network. So, what inspired you really to just start working with these places, and how how did they prepare you for where you are now?
For Unpopular Review, I was actually in this women's wrestling group, Ladies Who Love Wrestling, on Facebook. And April Rodriguez, who was the first woman host on Unpopular Review. She was like the first lady of Unpopular Review before she left. She asked randomly, "Oh, is there any women wrestlers, like wrestling fans, who wouldn't mind popping on a podcast?" So I'm like, "All right, a podcast." Like I'm thinking it's like audio podcast. I've been doing my own podcast previously with British Brown Girls, and so I'm like, I've been doing this for that for 3 years, and it was just like having a conversation with me and my solstice Brittany, who never agreed on anything, but we were like this, but we were always on opposite sides. Like she's Team Instinct, ill, Team Backstreet Boys, like that kind of thing. And so we always like had that joke, like we never agree, but you're my soul sister. And so to me, it was like, oh, okay, that's like a piece of cake. And so I did one like episode online, and it was like, yeah, come to the viewing party in the city. So I'm like, I mean, okay, I can, I guess, kind of show up. I'm like, kind of be quiet. I don't really talk to people I don't know right away until I feel comfortable. And so I observe. That's just how I am. And so next minute, they was like, yeah, let's have a little talk about it after show. I was like, wait, pause. What do you mean after show? That was not like, no, that's not part of the plan. And so that was like very first time I was on a camera, like in person with people watching at that viewing party. And I believe it might have been the Royal Rumble actually in 2020. And I was like, wait, we're doing this on camera. And I was like, no, you didn't tell me. Like, I'm so not prepared. And I think I had my Shawn Michaels shirt on that day too. And so it kind of went from there. And I was liked enough that they was like, would you mind being like a host? And I'm like, okay. And so I normally did the Monday Night Raw show originally with Chris and David, and then it was I think one point it was me, Ron, and Chris, and then me, Chris, and Steven. I sometimes popped on other shows, but Monday Night Raw was usually the show I was on, and so uh, that I guess it got me more comfortable. I guess as far as speaking, or when I went on my rants, as everybody was like, "You always want your little rants," and I'm like, "Yeah." You mentioned Brock Lesnar, I have to go to a whole rant about how I didn't like him or Goldberg, a whole rant about why ill, and there's a whole rant, and people was like, "Yo, you're so like animated." I was like, "Oh, but this is legit how it is." Like I do not know ill, and so because of that, it kind of helped in regards to like when like certain things, like when I made the rant about Ava and The Rock with the nonsense, and I kind of just realized that, like, I listened to it back, and I'm like, oh, I really want the whole thing, and it wasn't supposed to be that, but it's usually how I get when I get like about a point I want to make, and so that helped. And then as far as Extreme Virtual Pro Wrestling, that's Max's like virtual wrestling thing. And so he used WWE 2K, and they make wrestlers, which is what the call stands for, create a wrestler. And then like they do like storylines, promos, and all this. And so I was doing commentary. And I was like, well, I don't know people's moves because, again, people like keep wrestlers and real wrestlers will change the name of a move. I don't got time to remember all that. And so I'm like, I can do color commentary. I know the stories enough that I can do color commentary. And so that actually helped me being a little bit more comfortable in regards to like mentioning people's backgrounds. As far as if I was like actually doing interviews with people, it did help when I wanted to like ask a question or look up like, oh, let me see about this part, and I can just bring up in the interview at some point. And so that helped. I still kind of about character, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do it as often because again, it requires me to speak a lot more than I'm probably comfortable speaking. And I want to be like a person who knows really what they're doing, like but it helped in that regard. Just like, okay, when I'm doing my own interviews, uh, I can ask a question and I can look up things and kind of, if I'm incorporating kayfabe wise about their gimmick, if they're in gimmick when I'm interviewing them, I can kind of play off that too. And so that helped that. I feel like what really clinched it was probably women's wrestling talk, honestly. I told TK I hated being on camera on. And full circle moment, because, Sarah was the one who got me in touch with TK. But like if I didn't, I feel like hosting doing like the little panels I started off with before the interviews, or doing like the news segments we used to have for Fight TV. Doing that helped me because it's like I'm only relying on myself, and I'm not usually I would rely on whoever I'm with, and I kind of still do it sometimes to an extent where if I'm with somebody, it's a lot easier for me to kind of piggyback off of somebody else's energy, and then I can just kind of play off that. But when you're doing it by yourself, you're focusing only on how you project or how you say it, and so I feel like that really clenched it for me as far as like yeah, I can. I still really don't like being on camera, and I still hate the sound of my voice, but I'm a lot more comfortable doing it now because I did all these other things previously.
Okay, that's a pretty interesting story. Just in this here again, you were out of your comfort zone with it, but you were still, trying to uplift these platforms. And something else that I noticed was that as one as like in unpopular review, as you know, some of the tides were changing, it's like you were still sort of like that one person that sort of held it down. No shade to the others, but I'm just saying, like, you were kind of the one that had to, you know, that was basically there to sort of hold it down when everyone else was doing other life things. And even though it was still a little bit, you know, jarring for you, you were still able to do that and be in that position. And I'm more than sure that you doing that, and then also even commentating like for digital, you know, for on the digital platform as well, like that had to be different too. But even then, you were still, you know, you still had a lot of courage to still do it regardless. So that is to be commended. So what would you say are like some of the best lessons that you've learned in your experiences, you know, as a content creator and as a host?
I think in the beginning I was always about like trying to have content all the time. And yes, I totally slacked because I've actually been just too busy. It's like I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this, and then like I would even film it and then totally forget to edit or whatever. And so like all these reviews for movies that came out this year, I've actually did. I'm like, okay, let me get this situated, and I haven't uploaded it yet, and it's honestly just been busy. I am a mom, and so mom stuff, never ends, never cuts off, and so when you're trying to make sure your kids is like also happy and doing well in school and like mentally okay with how the world is, unfortunately. And then they have their also activities that they do separately. Like my oldest plays bass and guitar and stuff, and she plays multiple things. And so, kind of getting her and helping with that, it takes some time. Uh, on top of the fact that I do ghostwriting work, and I am the only like kids picking up kids 3 different schools, 3 different times. It's a lot, and so sometimes I like forget. And then especially with this year, I've been doing more shows, or being more at like media things, or I'm doing press stuff, and so it's or like now with the panels, and it's like I'm so busy trying to get that together that I'm like, oh man, I forgot to do this too, and so totally slack with my other stuff, and so I feel like if anything, just like the lessons is like don't be too hard on as far as like I was really extra about if it wasn't a certain way, or if I need to have more content, or if I need to be more bubbly and not how I am. Like I'm very sarcastic. Usually, if you know me well enough, sarcasm will come out. And I go on my rants or whatever, and I'll just go to the whole thing and be like, okay, we can reel it back in after I just spoke for like 10 minutes about like a bunch of whatever. And so I feel like that's who I am. And so not to like try to change that, because I was a little concerned like, well, people like that this is actually who I am as a person. And like you're getting that when I'm like ranting or when I'm being very sarcastic or I make like and it's like it's just I find it funny. I'm probably gonna like, repost it, and it's just because I laughed. Nothing like it's not like anything as complicated as people think it is. And so yeah, I feel like that's like the biggest thing, and I guess not letting everybody get to me, because there was some unfortunately I've had some weird comments, or some really rude, disrespectful things, especially in 2020. And I think people would get real, real bold. And I did let a lot of that get to me. I'm not gonna lie. I actually questioned if I was gonna leave wrestling altogether because I did not want to deal with that. And so it's a little better, and I don't really get that too much now. And I don't know what's gonna happen like a year or two, how
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna be. Most times now, I usually have a smart comment that I can just block, and I'm okay not responding and not taking it as a personal slight against myself. So I feel like that's the thing, and trying to be more like proud of what I've done, because I do have a habit of being very pessimistic about things, and I'll be like, oh well, it's not that great. I did this, no, I really, it's not, no, like somebody else did this way better, and I have a habit of like uh kind of erasing what I did do, and so I'm trying to work on when I do something like, no, you did this, and it's fine to you know celebrate that you did this. So like with the panel, so I was really sitting there stressed. I'm like, oh my god, like there's so many people who probably could have done something or who was way more known than I am. But then I was like, no, but I actually did this. It actually came out very well. It's making its rounds now. I got to have some amazing people on there, and people have taken some things away from that. And so I did what I wanted to do. And so that's something to be happy about. But it was hard for me to get here because I was questioning, oh, this is not great, or could I have done something different? Could I have done it better? Because somebody else have done the same thing. And so I feel like that's something I'm learning, but I'm still kind of trying to hold on to. Like, just it's okay to not be completely perfect, but it's also okay to be like happy with what you did accomplish, and everything doesn't need to be like perfect, perfect, perfect all the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I'm still learning too, is the fact that with me, I'm a Virgo. So I be trying to be perfect all the time. Even today, I was freaking nervous. And it's just kind of like, bro, like everything isn't meant to be perfect. I was actually telling someone this yesterday. Like sometimes the first step is knowing that you're really good at something is it try it and then you wound up sucking the first time. So you can know how to improve and be okay, and realize that everything isn't perfect. And honestly, I feel like that's one of the best lessons to learn too. So yeah, I think it's great that you were able to apply all of those lessons, and even in the moments where you did or you may have wanted to quit, you were still, persistent in realizing that your voice has worth regardless of any negativity that was within you, but then any negativity that you face from the outside. And that's something that is to be commended because life can get hard, and sometimes in the wrestling landscape, we can be really hard on each other and really unkind as well. As so in the end, I'm just glad that you never really gave up, and you found your footing and you found your lane and you stayed in it. And then when you move out of it, you move out of it because that's what you want to do. So I completely get that. So, um, what have been some of your favorite interviews since you have started, in Cat We Trust? Like, what have been some of the coolest things that you've experienced on your show?
It's like so many like random things. Like the Primal Fear interview, I actually was very nervous to do by myself because there's three guys. And I'm like, oh my god, I have to interview all three. And so I did ask Chris from a pop review. I was like, so do you mind popping in with me and kind of co-hosting this with me? And we did that live. And so I normally don't do a live stream interview, but for both times I interviewed them because I didn't do it this year. I feel bad. I probably should see if I can get them before the end of the year. But I've done it 2020, 2021. We did a live stream kind of interview, me, Chris, and them. And so that was fun because kind of them with their banter between each other. And then like one who liked the hip hop music and another who liked metal. And it was like that, ew, what do you listen to? And it was like that like cool vibe kind of to the point where now that, as I always say, the homies, that was actually really fun. And again, they were very gracious. Again, from the first time I did it, I was like, that was my second interview with them the first time. And so that was cool. When I interviewed Misa Kate, and she was an I Love Lucy fan, and if you know me well enough, you know I actually really love I Love Lucy because it's like silly humor where it's not degrading or extra rude to be funny, and I'm okay. I prefer humor where it's like you don't have to be extra disrespectful to be funny. And so because it's like so like silly type humor, I love that show. And so she said, I was like, what? And we were the whole thing like this. She like, I love Lucy, the whole thing. I was like, are we best friends now because we like this? Or Iris Spiral, who is like, like horror stuff as well, like Broadway, and I'm like, girl, me too. And so it's like little things like that. Or Kid Bandit, who when I interviewed them, it was like the fact that they was like my question about the anime tag team partner, which is super like, oh, you like anime, so do I. We like like what is your favorite? And that was like one of the most favorite questions. Like my interview, they like enjoyed my interview, and how like I now we're friends now. And so from that interview, friendship with Viva Van, who actually said to me it was probably one of her best interviews she's ever had because it was very like considerate or kind, and also talked to her like a regular person. And so things like that, I feel like from every interview I've always gained something, if it wasn't a friend or like at least networking opportunity, or just the fact that thank you guys for giving me a chance to pop my little podcast with somebody who we probably can interview with. And so it's always like little things. I feel like I've appreciated every guest I've had for different reasons, just because either it was a really funny conversation or it was just like super real conversation where it was none of that like it feels awkward. Because I try to talk to people like I want to be talked to, and so it's like make people feel comfortable, like we're friends, and like this is just a regular chat and nothing like that. And so I feel like that's I don't have like favorites, but there's moments like I was like, oh, this is something I really enjoyed from this interview, and I like appreciate that this and I haven't heard anything like bad back, like oh you guys would do terrible or any of that. And so I take it as like they've always been like you've actually always done your due diligence when you ask a question, and you always talk to us like respectfully and always was like kind and like well thank you I tried. So I feel like that's it's just like little things like that. I'm like oh this is super awesome to do with this interview.
Yeah, I find that those are the best moments in interviews. It's kind of like when you find that this person that you're interviewing from a professional standpoint actually has more in common with you than you're expecting. Like that's the coolest thing ever, and then you wind up going on a whole rant about a rant conversation about various things, and then you have to refocus and go back to what in the world you were actually talking about. That happened to me with Miranda Morales. We had a whole side conversation in our interview about Grey's Anatomy. It was lit. It was lit, and I don't regret any of it. And I still posted it and went on about my life because I'm just not gonna regret that. Like I'm never gonna regret having a conversation like that because that makes you more. I find that stuff like that in interviews makes you more relatable. So in the end, even though you weren't trying to get sidetracked, it's okay if you do because in the end, once you do bring it back to the actual subject, you're just kind of like, okay, let's get back to this, but then you're still having fun and it's not all business and it's not all serious. So that's always the best thing that I find. So what would you say is the craziest thing that's ever happened on your show?
Oh, craziest? I don't know. I feel like my stuff has been pretty PG or like pretty chill. Um, I think there was like a promo that was one time done, and it might have been with Jay Bujito, and that was fun. And then we went a whole thing about liking ginger ale because I do love some ginger ale. And I was like, what? It was such a random thing. I was like, yeah, you like ginger ale too, and it's so like it's ginger ale, literally nothing important. But we went, and I think he did like a promo which was really good, and I was like really hyped about. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens after this, even though this was my show. And so I don't think anything too crazy happened. I think like the worst situation was probably just the time where this wrestler had me wait for 2 hours. And I was like, okay, I kind of have to reschedule now because I kind of have other things I have to do. And the response was a bit rude. I was kind of annoyed because I was like, listen, I gave you 2 hours of time, and most people would have left after like 15 minutes. They would be like, okay, we're going to reschedule or we won't do it at all. And I was still there waiting. And so that was probably the one time I was actually really annoyed. As I'm just like, courtesy is so important. Like, I was very courteous. I always double check and with my people I'm gonna like we're still on, make sure the time is still okay and all of that so there's no confusion. And so that I was a little annoyed by it because I was just like, dude, 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 hours I waited, and then me saying, okay, I now have to reschedule was an issue. I was kind of annoyed because I'm like, most people wouldn't give you this, and I did. And so yeah, I think that was probably like the craziest thing, only because I was like really agitated, and I responded respectfully, but I was actually really upset because it was just like it's kind of rude. Like you had me wait, there was no response from you, and then it's like now you're mad that I have to reschedule. I was like, I'm a whole mom. I have other things I have to do. I can't just wait here all day and hope you pop out to record or whatever case may be. So that's probably crazy. I feel like I never had anything like super insane happen. Yet, who knows? In like 2023, if that'll change. But I feel like everything's been pretty like just super chill. It was just that incident. I was kind of like, no, absolutely not. That's kind of where you get mad, Katrina, because no, we're not doing this. But that was probably like the craziest thing that's happened.
Yeah, you have to respect your like people have to respect your boundaries, and I understand that you can be flexible, but don't be so flexible to where it gives off the impression that you don't have a spine. And that's something that I don't like. Is like when people don't respect your time and then it's like they get mad at you when you tell them, like, no, I can't do this. But it's like you're trying to be, understanding with them, but at the same time, it's just like, you disrespected my time. So since this is my time, I'm going to reclaim it. Like Representative Maxine Waters, I'm going to reclaim my time and do what I need to do. And that might not necessarily be a crazy thing, but at the same time, that is valid and that does happen. So I'm glad that you were able to handle that, and reclaim your time in that way. So yeah. So you did mention that you are a avid horror movie lover, but are there any other, and you did mention that you're also a writer. So do you have any other hobbies that you like to partake in, outside of wrestling and outside of being a mother?
No, I feel like now it's pretty chill. I mean, I've always been a bit of a homebody. Like I've done like karaoke, but that's with friends or escape rooms and stuff like that. But I've always been like kind of home reading a book. And so now it's like I listen to audio horror, which is like somebody YouTube usually kind of telling stories or reading cases. And there's like my few guys like Mr. Nightmare or Corpse Husband who actually have the fibro like I do. And so for me, when he was like, "Oh, I'm gone for a while," totally understood. I was like, yes. Sometimes fibro will put you on your ass and you will be completely off of what you was trying to do or what you wanted to do, or you won't feel well for a long time. And so, as a person who is sometimes very hard to explain to people when you look normal and you don't look like anything is wrong with you, and I'm like, no, sometimes I'm literally like dying, and you have no idea because you're used to kind of putting on a face for it. And so that was automatically like a yay, you understand. Like, and so I gravitated because of that because I'm like, one, many guys don't get it, and so it's not as common as women getting it, but it's still like a lot of people, if you look normal, they don't think anything is wrong with you. When you're like, oh, you seem fine, I'm like, no, I'm in like terrible pain right now, but I'm like sucking it up, or because I'm used to it, and so I'm managing it, or whatever the case may be. And so, audio horror, definitely, I do like horror movies. It's bad. I now it's like I've as like jokingly now it's like The Conjuring and Insidious is like background noise now, so I'll just put it on its play and I'm doing stuff, and it's like so to the point where it's bad. Or again, I can go to bed with horror movies. I don't feel bad about it at all. It doesn't like make me scared or any of that. And some people know I am like a witch, and so I do like dabble a little bit in spirituality stuff. Not as much as I need to probably because again, busy. And then writing, just my fictional stuff. I do write romance novels. I do like happy ever afters and happy and like yay love and all that stuff. But I do want to write something horror one day. That's like my first love, and so I want to do that one day. I wanted to do it well, and so that's a whole different level of writing that I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that just yet, but hopefully I can do that. And so that's pretty much it. There's like book stuff and being home, and now just wrestling, which is like a lot of wrestling now. And so sometimes it feels like, oh my god, there's more wrestling this week. There's so much. There's wrestling I think every day this week, I believe. And so it's a lot. I think maybe some days when there's not a pay per view, but I think from Monday to Saturday there's some kind of wrestling happening. And so it's a lot. So I feel like I don't have too much time to do as many other things that I possibly could be doing, but it's cool. I'm navigating.
Yeah, that's all you really can do is navigate. I love um I may not necessarily partake in horror as much as say someone like you who really, partakes fully in it, but I will say this though, my favorite, I feel like the two horror movies I gravitate to the most are Carrie, like classic Carrie, and then Chloe Grace Moretz's Carrie. That was cool, and Jennifer's Body, which I feel like a lot of people crap on a lot, but I really feel like is actually really good. In the sense that, it was a wonder watching it, but then at the same time, I still felt like the story was really good. And I feel like a lot of people crapped on it back in the day because they felt like it was one thing when it was actually another thing. Whereas now I find there's a greater appreciation for it as a movie. But those, that's my limit. Like, outside of those two, I don't do horror. Like, I just, because stuff sticks in my head, like horror stuff stays in my head, and then at the most inopportune times it pops up, and then it stays there, and then I get scared that maybe it could happen in real life, and it's just like too much for me. So that's why I try my best not to watch as much horror movies. I have watched a little bit of American Horror Story, but that's literally it. That's literally it. That's it. I can't go as far as, a Final Destination or, other stuff like that. But I appreciate that other people like it too. So yeah. And then I like Get Out, but that's more of a psychological thing. But I also went to see that because of the social part of it too. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I
Don't
would.
take
I know it's supposed to be hard, but it's definitely not hard. That's definitely more of a like psychological thriller, if anything.
mhm.
I mean, horror. I guess if you want it from the perspective of what they would do with black people, I'm like, yeah, I guess you could use it, but I felt like it was definitely more psychological thriller, if anything, than horror. But it was a good movie. I
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah, that's all I'll do. That's all I'll do. That's just my limit. That's my limit. Like, don't take me to a haunted house. Don't do that with me. Like that. No. Like, no. Just give me some candy. I'm straight. So yeah. Moving on though. I want to ask you, you did make mention of it a little while ago during our time together, but how did you find out about Women's Wrestling Talk and TK Trinidad, and what exactly inspired you, to join it, once you realized exactly, what it was and, what it was about? Like, how did that happen for you, and what helped make, what did, how did you make the decision to actually join?
So Sarah. I forgot how I started following Sarah on Twitter. I can't remember anymore because it's been like too long. But I know Sarah also writes as well, and I think that might have been the reason. And I was like, oh, it's so cool again when you have somebody who has like a common interest. So I was like, oh, you like wrestling? You're a wrestler. You write books too? What? Awesome, because I write books, and so I think she posted that they were looking for hosts, and that I saw it a couple of times, and I was like, no, not. And then I was like, what's the worst that could happen? I guess it could say no, you suck or something. But I asked her, so what do I need to do? And she's like, well, do you have any clips? And I'm like, at the time, I was like, oh, I have a couple of interviews, but like, do you need like famous interviews? Is it like, is the rest of my interview going to be enough? Because I'm not sure where this is, like, as far as. And so I did send the interviews, I believe, with Tristan, Danny Limelight, because I did interview him as well. And then she was like, well, you're my pick, but let's send you TK. And so it took a little bit. I actually reread those DMs earlier today, actually. And I was like, oh, it really was like this. I forgot, like, of how there was a little bit of a message tag because I wasn't, like, it wasn't happening right away. And then it was like, oh, let's see how you do and like what it is. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I think the first thing I was on might have been like a panel. I believe it might have been, I feel like it might have been Latino wrestlers. I feel like that was my first panel I did. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is not bad. And so this is, if I'm with people, I'm okay. If I can work off somebody, this is not bad. I'm not doing anything by myself. I thought that's what I was going to do at first. I'm like, by myself? Oh, me? Oh, no. That's not, no. No. I have to be with somebody. And so, once I like really saw like it was pretty structured and like how I was like, okay, this can like help. What's the worst that could happen? Like it's more experience, but it wound up actually truly opening doors. And so like the whole like hosting now or like being comfortable to like interview somebody like Freddie Matthews, what I would have never done otherwise. And I was nervous when I first did it, but I was able to ask a question and like throw a fun one in it because I like to add a random fun question and not just all wrestling. And so the fact that I was able to do that and then it was remembered, it's like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh, that's awesome, or like, or doing the backstage correspondence because I went to interviewing Tay, and that show for Black Girl Magic, the first one was how I got into VR wrestling, and I was like, we need a backstage correspondent. Would you want to do it? I'm like, me, really? And it's always like I'm always very like confused when people say it because I'm like, there's so many people you could probably ask, and so me, and so those opportunities allowed me to interview like Mercedes Martinez or like Jay Lethal, Speedball, Mike Bailey, or again Gail Kim, Mickey James, Medusa, like you know people who I've like idolized or like I got to meet Jazz and like, fangirls, but like to be in her presence with her in the locker room with somebody like Jazz and a Thunder Rosa, people like that. It's like I would have never got to do that if I didn't learn wrestling talk, and I feel like that like the Unpopular View kind of opened a little bit, and then my channel opened it where I was more because my channel is like everything. It's wrestling, but I like a lot of things. I like horror movies. I like TV shows. I love, like anime and stuff like that. And so my channel's everything. And so wrestling wise, Women's Wrestling Talk has truly allowed me to be part of like media press things or be in the press box or just people who have recently like, no, you're a peer, and I'm like, I'm a peer again. Forgetting I do work in it, but it's always weird, I guess, to kind of hear it be said, like, oh, you're actually one of our peers. We work together, and that means like everything. I'm like, oh, you consider me one of you guys. Like that's super awesome. Never would have thought. And so, yeah, I feel like I feel like it was probably one of the best decisions I could have made, honestly. And I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. It was just like me kind of taking a shot in the dark and like the worst thing they could tell me is you suck. No, we don't need you or something. That's not what happened, but that's the worst that can happen in a situation. And I wanted truly opening doors. And so super glad I actually took that step of like not talking myself out of reaching out to Sarah because I would have never led to any of this what I'm doing now.
Yeah, like the thing for me was I had always seen women's wrestling talk in passing, but then again, since we're sharing stories since we're on the same network, for me it was kind of different because my journey with it started like years ago cuz I would watch TK on AfterBuzz TV. And I found AfterBuzz through watching Scandal, and then when I saw that AfterBuzz had other shows with wrestling, which I didn't have a whole lot of time to watch, but I could listen to these other people talk about it. That was how I found out about it. And I believe she was either on the Raw after show or on the SmackDown after show, but mostly on the Raw one. And that was how I found out about TK. And sometimes I would agree with her opinion, sometimes I wouldn't, but then other times I was just like, I knew who she was. And I was just like, what they're doing is really cool. But seeing as my focus was elsewhere, I never thought that I could actually do it. But seeing as I knew I really loved certain shows or whatever, I was like, what, that would be something cool if I could do that. But I'm focusing over here now, so I couldn't. So it's hilarious how me starting my own podcast, and then finding my voice and only having audio clips was still enough. When I saw that they were looking for people for Women's Wrestling Talk, I was just like, okay, so I only have these audio clips. I only have these audio interviews because the way you had interviewed Thunder Rosa through Women's Wrestling Talk, like I think I sent my clip with Thunder Rosa and it was just audio, but I was like, what, I'm not sure how they're gonna feel about this, but I'm just gonna try anyway, whatever. And and they actually wound up liking it. She liked it, but then I was nervous because I was like, I don't know if TK gonna like it. Like I wasn't sure. I was just like, I wasn't sure. But the idea that she was made me, happy. And at first it was kind of hard because I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. I don't know how I'm gonna show up as a host or as a news person. Like I feel like this has really stepped on my game in terms of journalism because I never really thought about it for real. And it's taught me kind of the ins and outs of it while also, thinking about it from a wrestling perspective and sort of combining the fan half of me with the journalism half of me. And I think it's been a blessing because I felt like an amateur at first, but now I don't feel like such an amateur no more because, because we've put all this work into it. And then I know I can always ask for help because I know there's that family there. There's you, there's TK, there's Emily, there's everyone. And if I need help with something, I know I can reach out and ask because y'all are there. And I love it. And I'm really glad that we have each other, to lean on in that way because like I said, it could be really hard, and then sometimes it could be hard balancing everything with it too. But I'm glad that in the end we have each other, and I know that's really mushy, but at the same time, that's the truth. That's the truth, and that's just how I feel about it. So I'm glad that found your voice in doing it, and they liked what you had to offer, and that you're here, and because you're here, I'm here. We have this friendship, and it's great. So that's cool. So, what would you say has been your favorite moment, in Women's Wrestling Talk so far? Because we're still growing. So, what's been your favorite moment so far?
Oh man, I don't know if I have a favorite moment. I feel like there's been different things I really enjoyed. Again, I got to interview with Medusa, and she's not somebody who does many interviews. And the fact that TK was like, I think you would like this. It's like everything I popped up on her Twitch because of that. Again, being able to speak to Gil Kim as part of Women's Wrestling Talk, both at a media thing, but also as an interview directly was like everything. Uh, you know, it's been like little things. I feel like there's like even with our NXT show, like the that super like that bond there, or like a friend. I feel like I've made some friends through all of this, and like that's always a super like amazing thing when you sometimes as adults you don't always make good friends, and so to get friends, I'm like, oh no, these are like my friends or my girls or whatever, and I feel like those things are like always like super awesome. Like I got my friends, I got these super awesome actually. I don't know if it's like a favorite thing. It's just been like little things like, oh, this is a fun day, this is a fun moment, or being looked at seriously again in the press box, and they're like, oh, you're I know who Women's Wrestling Talk is. Oh, you're really cool, awesome. Like where people are recognizing that, and so that's always pretty cool. I won't know if it's like I have a favorite. There's too many things I like and appreciate over my time being Women's Wrestling Talk.
That's fair. That's fair. I feel the same way too. There's too many. There's way too many to kind of just narrow down into just one thing. It's way too many. So so when did you decide that you were going to transition into backstage correspondence for independent wrestling and also And also ring announcing too, because this year you did ring announcing at Black Girl Magic 2 for the first time. And I was there as color commentary with Faye Jackson, who is an icon in independent wrestling in terms of Black women. So when did you decide to make the transition into ring announcing and backstage correspondence?
So yeah, the backstage correspondence originally happened with the first Black Girl Magic. I did interview Tay, and Shantice is the one who kind of was like, you should interview her. She's doing this. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Black woman show dedicated to Black women in wrestling, and there's not much of like spotlight a lot of times on Black women in wrestling. That's amazing. Sure, interview her. And then me saying that I eventually do want to work in a wrestling, like I was like, I would love to be in WWE and work in that capacity. And me saying that during the interview, when I'm like, oh, would you mind coming to the show? And I'm like, wait, what? Like, really? And so that happened for the first Black Girl Magic in 2021. And Peter, who happened to be there at that show, was like, well, I'm starting my own promotion, and we would like somebody backstage correspondent. Would you mind doing that? And again, it's like, so a lot of people you probably ask. So you're asking me. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And that's been cool. And so the ring announcing was super. No, that wasn't supposed to happen. I was very nervous. At that told everybody who I said that they was very kind. I was like, oh, you was great. And I was like, was I? Because I was really nervous. I felt like you could tell I was nervous, and what I got eventually was okay. I know in the beginning I was super nervous. I think I was shaking at one point, and that was Tay again saying, well, we need a ring announcer. And I'm like, wait, what? Okay, I mean, I can't really tell you no because, again, you're kind of the reason I'm doing the backstage stuff, and so I don't want to tell you no. But I hate public speaking. I feel like backstage correspondent, you did an interview, you kind of move along. With ring announcing, you have to announce the coming in, announce who wins, then all this other stuff, which means I have to talk more. Like, oh, I hate my voice. So I'm hoping I can try to do more of that and not feel as nervous as I did the first time. But backstage interviewing is now for me piece cake. I feel like the ring announcement, like, I don't know if I can do this again. But the backstage is like, now I know, like, what do we need to hit? Okay, cool, we got this. And they usually ask me like if it's something like, oh, we're in kayfabe. I'm like, oh, I already know. I'm not gonna be offended if you say something that might be a little bit rude. I'm getting in your humor mode is perfectly fine. And so, now I can do that and it's not a big deal. It's not too much like stressing about, let me think of the right thing we need to say, and I can kind of figure it out right away. And so it's it's been a thing. I've gotten better, and I've gotten more confident in it. But I still hate like hating my voice or hating like, is there like, am I not the right look for backstage correspondent? I'm a very tiny woman, and so it's like I feel like people will take me seriously. I'm so tiny compared to like other people, or not as like curvy as other people, and so it's like, am I taken as seriously as somebody who knows what she's doing? And sometimes people think I'm a lot younger than I am, and so, but no, I'm not that young anymore. Not anymore, and so yeah, it's always that kind of me just self-doubting that, but it's been pretty cool. Again, I feel like I've gotten comfortable now, where it's like not too much of a stressful thing. Where I'm like, oh my god, am I doing this right? I feel like the interviews is ring announcing. I'm still probably going to be very nervous until I get used to doing them more. Whereas then it's like second nature. Because like now the women's wrestling top interviews, I've done a few by myself now, and I wouldn't have done it a year ago. I was like, by myself? Like, are we doing this together, TK? TK, no, I always like, so we're on this together, right? Like, it's me and you. I always was quick to ask that question. Now she's like, you want to do this? I'm like, okay, I can get my questions together and I can do this, and it's not a big deal. But in the beginning, I was like, absolutely not. Like, we're doing this together, right? Like, together. There's no separate solo stuff. And so now that I can do that, instead of, I don't think about it too much. It's just like, okay, I can just get it, do my job as best as I can, and hopefully it's a good interview. And so that has helped. I've gotten more comfortable doing it, where it's not like before, where I was like, no, can we have somebody here with me? I still don't like hosting shows by myself, like after shows. I feel like it's weird talking to yourself in an after show, because it's like you're kind of reflecting on a show. So that's kind of odd, and I still kind of funny. Like, nah, I need somebody on the show with me, because talking to myself is so weird. Because it's like, no, you're reflecting on what you watch. You need somebody to kind of talk with you. It's a weird thing to kind of do this unless you're ranting about something. And so that I still really like doing. But as far as like interviews, now I can do that, and it's not too much of an issue anymore.
But you are talking, to yourself if you're not co-hosting with someone, because I've had to do that on Friday nights where Drian Santana, shout out to her, who's our editor-in-chief, and my tag team partner for SmackDown show, like, she will be on assignment elsewhere, and then I'll have to do it by myself. But I'm not as uncomfortable with it, because before women's, because like before women's wrestling talk, I started out by myself. So it's just like for me to talk about wrestling like on screen or like in audio form and talking about it by myself, it's just like, okay. It's different for me. So I'm just like, okay. But for you, I can imagine, it is kind of nerve wracking. And then even with having to lead a conversation with backstage correspondents, I imagine that it's kind of tough. But then you also have to be on your toes because you also have to know the story, the background story of and the motivations of the superstars and why it is that they did what they did, before, during, and after the match. And you have to definitely be on your toes with that. But I don't doubt your abilities to be on your toes with that and carry a conversation because clearly you can. Um, so I feel like it's just a matter of you sort of, believing that you have, what it takes within you already, and just, standing on that, even though you're just kind of like, but don't do that. It's okay. And as far as you, being small, I mean, Kayla Braxton's small and she's still able to carry. So I feel like Katrina can carry. So as long as you carry, then everything's fine. I feel like I say carry a lot. But either way, you get the point. Okay. You can carry the conversation. Now, ring announcing might be a little bit different too, but I still think you can carry there too. Because I think you did a good job at Black Girl Magic too. And maybe you'll do a good job next year at 3 too. So you just never know. You never know. But I feel like you did a good job. You did
Oh,
good.
I was so nervous. I was like, no, I was definitely shaking this first. I was like, oh my god, I messed it up. Let's say it wrong. Let's something wrong. I'm not gonna say it right. And I get nervous. I mess up people's names. It's done on purpose. It's like I get nervous. I'm like, oh crap, I know that's not the way you pronounce this name. Let me say this correctly. So yeah, but maybe I feel like if I do it more, I'll probably get more comfortable doing it. It's like the interviewing. I've done so much now that it's like not too complicated. It's not too hard.
Yes. So, how do you feel about the state of wrestling in terms of the independence and on a mainstream level? And what do you think is good about it and what can be improved on it? Because I know we've gone through multiple changes this year with leadership changes and people coming back to things and promotions that you didn't think they would come back to, people leaving promotions that you didn't think they would ever leave or go back to. So, how do you feel about the state of where we are now since it is November?
I feel like it's like we got some good steps in, but we still have like a lot of work. Like I like that there's so many promotions. It was nice, like the New Japan show that just happened in New York. We got with some women on the show, and it was done where they were promoted on the show, and it wasn't like this weird pre-show thing where we didn't really hear about them. It was kind of promoted, and so that's a good thing. It's a good step considering women's history with New Japan. I like that with the indie promotions, we have so many different types of wrestlers, and so I feel like if you don't like a certain style of wrestling, if you don't like a certain style of wrestling, there's other options for you. Like I'm not a fan of death match wrestling personally. I don't really like it. I feel like death match has to be a reason for death match if we get to that point. But just to have it every time, it's like, but why are we doing this every time? And so personally, I'm not a fan, but I know people who are, and so there's those places that have that type of wrestling, or the Joshi style wrestling, or like hard hitting style wrestling. And then you got like the entertainment aspect of WWE, where it's okay, we got some good parts here and some good character development here. I feel like in general, women wrestling should be promoted a little better because it's like the weird one women's match per card. It's always a little odd still. There's too many women now for the nonsense like that, or um, probably better with like certain people making sure women's storylines are done better. I feel like as a wrestling fan, that's kind of agitating. It's like why is somebody's stories still seeing the petty, like the petty storylines? And while I know some women are truly like this, we all know a woman who might be a little bit catty, a little bit petty. We know that all women are not like that, and so I feel like that shouldn't always be the catalyst for stories. Like, oh, you're being kind of petty. That's we got a feud. And it's like, why is that always the reason? And so just do that better. I feel like, but I still feel like there's so many options now. There's so many indie promotions now. There's so many different types of people we're starting to see in the spotlight. Like Black women, Spanish women, Asian women. We're seeing, people that's part of the LGBT community. Non-binary people, and it's like obviously there's the trolls and people who are cruel for no reason, but for the most part it's celebrated. And I think that's important considering wrestling in the 80s, where you had, black women getting kind of snuck into an arena to have a wrestling match. Or, wearing, stuff like that. Like where it's like now it's like, oh, we got this type of show, we got this wrestler here who's for me who looks like me, that's super awesome. Or, you have, like I mention her a lot because again, I think she does such great things. Miss Five Belts, I think she has 5 belts. Viva Van, who first Vietnamese American like wrestler in here. That's to me insane. And so like to do that and still be a 5 belt champion, like you got 5 belts and you're like killing it. It's like stuff like that. It's like I think that's so amazing. That's so different than let's say when I started watching wrestling in the '90s, or it's a lot different than it is now. I think that's good. Do we need this still work? Absolutely. There's still so much work that needs to be done with regards to how women wrestling is taken, how we need more women backstage or more women writing stuff. And I think Stephanie McMahon might have posted something earlier yesterday when it was like the first all woman photography team, which, as we all know, there's a lot more male photographers than women in wrestling, and so in general. And so that's cool. I'm like, okay, we're finally starting. Like that's cool. And so it's like we're making progress, slow, but it's happening. And so I'm grateful for that. But of course, there's things that could be better.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of that. Like when it comes to diversity, it's like we definitely have come a long way, but there's still so much more that can be done. And I'm really glad that even in the midst of so much change, wrestling is still, growing for the better. And it is great that there are so many options. Cause I know when I first started, in podcasting about wrestling, I was only, talking about the WWE stuff because that was the only thing I knew about that was the most accessible to me at the time. Even though I knew that there were other promotions, I just wasn't sure exactly how to address those in an intelligent manner. So I decided to sort of take some time to sort of get to know these other promotions and see and really learn more about what other wrestling promotions had to offer. And I'm really glad that I actually was able to open my mind and do that, because wrestling is just so beautiful and so vast. And even in the places where you think, oh, well, it's not like this big thing, you know, it may not be the big circus, but other circuses are still operating and it's still a good thing that they're operating. It's like for every Ringling Brothers, you're going to always have a Universal Circus or another circus over here or another circus over here and another circus over here that's offering you different things. You may get elephants over here or you may get giraffes over there, or even though people frown upon that sort of thing in terms of animals, and stuff like that, but that's just, what I think of when it comes to, wrestling sometimes. It's like WWE is Ringling Brothers. And let's say, for all intents and purposes, Impact or AEW would be like a Universal Circus, or Invictus would be, a Universal Circus. Like, there's just so many different things for so many different people. And I'm glad that that is happening more and more. And with the diversity component of it, from sexualities to also people of different backgrounds and colors and everything, like it's great because people and kids are able to see themselves in other ways that they may not have been able to see each other in the past. Like it's insane and it's beautiful. And speaking of people of color and women of color, you in this panel. This is the question I've been waiting to get to, because I feel like you and the Behind the Magic Women of Color in Wrestling panel is probably one of the greatest things that has happened this year in wrestling, period. So I want to know what inspired you to come up with this panel and apply to all these various Comic Cons to tell these stories, of these women, including myself, in wrestling. And did you expect for it to go as far as it has, like from New York to the UK to LA in a couple of weeks and various other places that I'm sure it might get to?
No, absolutely not. I originally tried to apply for New York Comic Con panel in 2021, and I told somebody that I was doing it, and then unfortunately the idea was kind of taken. I was kind of upset about that actually, because I was like, I told in like confidence, like I thought I always wanted to see, and I didn't know they took panels like that, and so let me see if I can do it. And so it kind of deterred me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, because it was word for word. And I was like, okay. And so I was a little sad about that. But so this time I was like, let me work on something where I'm like thinking of, again, working on women's wrestling talk. And I'm like, you know what? Like, there's a lot of different women, but, and again, I'm a black woman first, but, to see women of color in general. It's just such a nice thing. And I already do a women of color reference on the book front with my book Brown Girls, which is literally about promoting women of color who write different genres of books. Because even in that world, in the book world, outside of young adult, we don't really see women of color put on the shelves like you might see a white author. And so that's something I'm like, oh, I already kind of have my feelings about that. Let's see if I can kind of tweak this pitch to be something that if I'm looking at this, I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And so I did rewrote it a couple of times. And why it might not seem like I did, because I was really like, no, maybe I change this word or change it this way and make it sound like it's not like. And so when I got the email from New York Comic Con, and I was like, I read it a few times because I was like, kind of like, what? You picked this? And like really, truly surprised because I didn't think I was. I was very pessimistic sometimes about things I do. And so I was like, no, they're not going to pick this, but I did anyway, whatever. And so when I got it, and I was like, holy crap. And so like I had to like process that for a little bit. And again, I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't say anything. I felt like I didn't want any like negative energy kind of affecting it this time. And so, yeah, and that was from that. And so, previously when I tried to do the Comic Con, the Repop actually sent me an email like, well, we have all these cons if you ever want to apply. And I, again, not thinking like, oh, I'm not doing any of that. And so email was kind of just there. And so I clicked back and I was like, let me see what didn't happen yet and see if I can do it. And so that's when I applied for the Birmingham one. And again, did not think I was going to get through because this is in a whole different country. And I believe they also got like so many submissions that it took them some time to actually respond. And so I asked like, oh, I just wanted to know because and then I can just kind of not worry about looking for an email or anything because I have all these email addresses because all the stuff that I do. And then she was like, oh no, we want you on and like on the main stage. And I'm thinking like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh, I can't get there. Like, oh no, sis, I don't got a passport. Like I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready. And so I'm like, okay, let me ask y'all again. Which is why I sent the email like, so guys, because I feel like now it's always so guys, dot something else. And so I didn't actually think that was actually really insane. And TK was the one who actually told me to apply for LA Comic Con. And again, did not think I was getting that because that guy told me that he went through a lot of submissions. They had to kind of split the submissions to decide. And so when you're that many where you got to make a team to decide and you still decided on mine, again, it's like, what? What? I'm not even in LA. Like, and so now I'm like, for the first time as a whole adult, traveling on a plane, which I've never done. And so, as an adult, and so it's like, holy crap, I would have never thought. And so, it's just kind of cool, honestly, that New York Comic Con is a place I went as a fan. I've been there for wrestling, I've been there for anime, I've been there for book stuff, comics. I've been there, and so to be there on the other side, it's like, oh, I'm here as a panelist. I'm here like part of like the staff and that people truly enjoyed what was discussed or they were happy with the people. And yes, there was some nonsense with people mad about who was on the panel or I didn't ask everybody. I was like, if I can have every woman of color in wrestling, I would do that. But they only give you a certain amount of time, and I went with people who have always been for me in regards to who have been very supportive of me, have always helped me in some way, or who's been very kind. And so that's what I went with, and it worked out. And people loved it. Again, we were the only wrestling panel in New York Comic Con, which is super awesome. And again, I kind of sad I didn't ask for a picture. I probably should have. That's me, my mistake. But even I heard that people did like it in the UK, which again, I don't live there, and I'm a New Yorker, and so that meant a lot. That people felt that there was a good discussion, and that's all I wanted. And so, no, I never ever thought it would be to the point where like, oh, this is at multiple cons. Oh, I'm going to be traveling for this. I was just glad you guys said yes. It's like, so you guys want to see this? I was just glad you guys said yes to be a part of it. And so now it's like, and I'm now meeting people I've worked with before. And so with the LA one, it's like, oh my God, my Cali people now, like, let's throw y'all in here if you wouldn't mind. And so it's like, oh, thank you for even thinking. And I'm like, if I can get, again, everybody on, I would, but I'm trying again women of color who've done different, and I wanted different like roles too. So like the wrestler, but also there's so many other things that women do in wrestling, and I wanted all of that kind of put out there. And so it worked well, but I did not had no idea. It's still crazy, honestly. Like I'm like, oh my God, you guys really like this bitch, really? Like it's always so weird because I'm like, is there not a better one or something? And so it's always just like cool in that way, in that regard.
Yeah, like I remember when you first told me you were doing it, I was just like, "Oh, that sounds nice. Like, that's wonderful. I'm glad that that's happening. I'm glad you're doing that." Now, I didn't expect you to ask me, number one, because I just didn't expect you to ask me because I never get expected to ask to do stuff like this because it's weird. I don't know. It's just something I have to work on within myself. And number two, I had just came from up there. I had just came from up there, from doing Black Girl Magic too, and I was and going to Jobber Slam too, and I came back home and I thought, okay, I've been to New York, twice this year. I'm happy about that. I'm gonna relax and just chill out or whatever. That Thursday, you asked me, and I was just like, for real? Okay. I like it wasn't even like a hesitancy. I knew this was important to you, number one, and I knew that this was important for the culture of women of color in wrestling as a whole. Cause I'm a black woman first and foremost, but at the same time, it's important for women of color as a whole to see themselves represented in stuff like that. And I love the idea. I feel like in any point where someone is saying, "Oh, I want to do something with women of color in wrestling," whether it be a panel or whatever, like I just want to be a part of it because I know that our voices are important, and if we're a part of the change, that we want to see in wrestling, then we need to raise our voices more. And for you to ask me to be a part of it, I was humbled and I was honored and I was really glad. And I am really glad that I've been able to do it um for these past two times. And I was just telling my best friend yesterday, like it blows my mind that this year I was at Comic Con, which is an anime convention in Birmingham, and I was just happy to have a fan table for my own podcast. I did not think that I would be a panelist for the second biggest convention in the country. Like, what? Like, that still blows my mind to think about even now. And if I talk about it even more, I'm gonna start crying. And I just don't feel like doing that today. But yeah, it's not lost on me that the greatness of it. And I'm so happy that greatness came from your brain, Cat. Like that came from you. Like that's one of your babies. Like seriously, like you did that. And I'm so glad you did it, and I'm so glad people are actually responding to it in a positive way. And I hope that it continues to go on and we continue to take it on the road until we can't no more. And even after we can't no more, I hope that somebody still picks it up again. Regardless, like either way, it's going to be cool, and I'm glad that you're doing that, and I'm glad that, people are wanting to listen, because it's so often that people want to silence us, right? But I'm glad that people are finally opening their ears and listening to our stories. And it's because, of you and so many other women who came before us who set the precedent for us to do this. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. And then we have Los Angeles coming up, and that's going to be cool too. And we have like a new set of women, and it's just going to be great. And I'm just really excited about that. So I'm just really grateful to be a part of it. And I'm glad that you asked me to be a part of it. So, do you see yourself working in wrestling on a mainstream company at some point in the future? Is that something that you want?
I would love that. I would love to work in WWE because that's what I grew up on. And while we know they have their issues, I would love to work there. Honestly, I wouldn't mind writing for them. I would do backstage correspondence. I couldn't do wrestling stuff because I would legit forget that that's kayfabe. I'll be dead ready to fight. They were talking to me all kind of crazy. Like somebody mentioned my, oh, we fighting. Okay, they would mention my kid. They would do like some of the stuff people would kind of put in their promos. They mention families and stuff like, that's not my kid, not me. I'll be really ready to like fight for real. And so, not wrestling, but I would love to write. I would love to do backstage correspondent. I wouldn't even mind doing like a pre-show, like what they do before pay-per-view. I would. I feel like I can do that. Uh, I mean, I can say AEW, but honestly, Tony Khan really upsets me sometimes. And I'm like, I have no poker face, and so I feel like he'll say something, and I'll be like, you know what, Tony, and I'll get fired because I have to poker face. I can't, like, it's really hard to control my facial expressions, and I feel like that will get me in trouble because he might say something. I'm like, bro, stop, and then here we are, me complaining, and like I'm fired. And so I don't know if I can work there because I can't. I don't do blind. I can't do blind tribalism. I just think it's weird. Like you can like what you like, but also everything's not perfect, and let's not lie like that. Let's not be in delusion. And that's the problem I think with a lot of the AEW roster sometimes. It's just why are we stop it, like, oh, we're the best, stop, or like, why are we lying, why are we doing this, like when he was the longest reigning promoter, like Impact didn't exist, and I'm like, okay, bro, clearly delusion. And see, when you do stuff like that, I'm a person to call it out, so we're gonna just lie like that on like a Friday or something, like let's not lie like that, let's stop. And so because of that, I don't think I could work with them. But I wouldn't mind working, or even with Impact, or wow, I would love to, if it's just like, yeah, even interviewing, just do some kind of something like that. I would love that. I don't know if it'll happen, but I would love to do that. Again, WWE top, obviously, because I grew up on that. I grew up watching WWE and all the shenanigans with that. So I would love that, but I honestly don't know. I can't even tell I'm doing this in 5 years. I have no idea what's gonna happen in 5 years, because I didn't think I would do this in two. It's been a crazy 2 year ride with this, and I never would have thought. It's like truly like just sometimes sitting like, oh my God, wow. And it's always just kind of weird, like, oh, I did this, I did this too. And it doesn't sometimes feel like it, because I feel like I'm so behind, or I feel like I'm so new with everything, and I don't know all the time if I'm doing it the right way, but it's still pretty cool. And so I don't know. I hope so, but I don't want to think too far ahead sometimes, because it's like, anything can happen tomorrow. If I'm still even here in 5 years or something, like, the world is crazy. And so, uh, hopefully.
Definitely. So my last question to you is, what is the greatest thing that wrestling has given you?
Oh man, I feel like it gave me a few things. Again, friends. There's a couple of people I've good friends with, and it's because we like wrestling. Shay, I met watching. We went to a viewing party for the first time together, and we went going to indie shows together, like House of Glory. And it was like a squad of us. I think it was like 13. At one time, it was like 15 of us at one show, and it was just the whole row was us. And that I got from wrestling. And or Hayden or Ray, my girlies, that we did wrestling with. And again, I've gotten friends with wrestlers who I would have never thought that I consider a friend now. So like Felicia, or Kid Bandit, or people like, oh, little sis, and I'm like, well, technically I'm older than you, but I guess because I'm tiny and you're like way bigger than I am, and sometimes when people say, listen, like, pause, this is older sister, like I am an older sister of my siblings as well, and so it's like big sisters, like, then let's not be disrespectful about little. I am not little sister, I'm older sister, but it's always like, oh, you consider me a sister, like, oh my god, like, thank you, like it's emotional about that. It's always cool. I think again, being recognized as a peer, that means a lot. I met Max kind of through the wrestling thing. Granted, I didn't almost answer him at first, and he like sent me a DM, and I'm like, you one of those, and like let me not answer right away, because you could be like one of the weirdos. I've gotten really weird DMs over the years, and so, but it wound up okay, and then the New Japan, and like, even though he had Brock Lesnar love, and I was like, ew, I don't like Brock Lesnar, so don't message me about him. It was always like the weird messages like that, and it wound up, he was the reason why I like New Japan, honestly, because he took me to G1 in 2019, and I was so impressed by Okada, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing! Like I need to watch everything this man has done. I need to watch all of this, and that one of being one of my top two promotions off of me going in 2019. And even when I went to the New Japan show that just happened in New York, I spoke to one of like their main, I think they're like their main Japanese TV station, that the New York office. I had a whole conversation. He was like, he even said like, oh, you're a big fan. I'm like, I know it's crazy because I haven't been a fan that long, but like, I will argue anybody about Okada. It's greatness. Like I will argue. I will be ready with facts. And so I feel like that I got because of wrestling, and like I got that stuff. And so like, or like the funny, if ever we had done like the shows and stuff like that, I feel like I've gotten little parts that I'm just like, oh, this is so cool. And then again, New York Comic Con, I feel like I don't know if I can ever like really truly like say everything of how I feel about that, because it was a lot to process. There was a lot of nonsense that was going into that as well, and there was a lot, and then I was busy, and I didn't even get a picture correctly behind. I was like so bad at myself. I didn't get a correct picture behind the podium because I was so like worrying about everything was right and make sure questions was right and everybody was okay and they were happy, and I didn't think to like, Katrina, take a picture regularly behind the podium, and totally didn't do that. And so LA Comic Con, make sure I do that because I totally slept. But just to, again, to be in a con that I almost go to almost every single year at the Javits, that I've been for both Comic Con and Book Con, which is the biggest book con ever, and I've been there for Book Con as well. And to be there again as a part of the program, that I feel like I wouldn't have gotten if I didn't have wrestling. And so it's like those things. Like I got some nice, awesome friends. I got to do some awesome things that I never would have thought. Like my kids tell people, and I'm like, you don't have to tell them that because like I don't do kid like stuff necessarily. Like wrestling's not always kid friendly all the time, and like no, but it's like super cool. And so like here, like a parent knew who I was off the fight. I'm like, what? Like super mom mode when I'm with my kids, and I'm not dressy. I'm like sweatpants, t-shirt, like hoodie on. You wouldn't even know. I'm like mom mode, and it's like, oh, I recognize you off Fight TV, and I was like, insane. Like that, how? Like how did you fight? Like how? And so that's always cool. That's always like really like special. I feel like I wouldn't have gotten any of that if I just didn't like wrestling. And so I'm always grateful for those things. And I feel like Comic Con is gonna take me a couple because I really hold that on. Like I really got to do that. So awesome.
Well, yeah, there all of that is, and that's really valid. And I'm so happy that it's giving you all these moments. And also just shout out to your kids. I love the fact that they think that what you do is cool. Because sometimes I do be wondering, like, do they think that what she's doing is amazing? Like, but it's good to know that they do. Well, Katrina Blake, thank you so much for coming on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast, especially on the first episode of this revamped edition of the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. So tell everyone where they can find you and follow you and what you've got going on.
I'm on most social media in Cat We Trust, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. E is a three, but it's in Cat We Trust. If you look up, you should find me. The pictures are pretty similar for the most part. As far as what I got going on, I'm trying to get more stuff on my actual YouTube channel. That's more off wrestling stuff. I did watch a couple animes I really enjoyed. I want to review them, and I do writing on Horror Obsessive, and I'm actually working on my Stephen King review because I just finished that book and it's pretty awesome. And horror stuff's usually on there. I do true crime on there as well if I'm not doing wrestling stuff. And then I work on a few wrestling sites for wrestling articles. And so they're all on my social media. You can find the links for that. As far as shows, I just did a show on the 4th of November in the Bronx, and I'm still posting the interviews for that slowly but surely. And I've had some super awesome interviews. That was a cool show. Again, the New York Comic Con and the UK Comic Con, because there's a switch on one of the panelists from one to the other on there, so the conversation's a bit different. And so they're both on the YouTube channel. Definitely check that out. I will be in LA at LA Comic Con on December 4th with Stephanie and TK, who's Women's Wrestling Talk, and Sarah, who's on WoW Wrestling, but also used to be part of Women's Wrestling Talk, and Rain Cruz, who again SummerSlam WWE, super awesome. And so again, they have met people through that, and so that's cool. So if you're in the LA area, please check it out. I'm not sure what the streaming is for that yet, so I don't know if it's going to be streaming anywhere. I have no idea. But if you're there in person, definitely please come check us out, and we'd love to meet you. We'd love to have a conversation. It's just a few months away, but also in April for WrestleMania Hollywood, I will be hosting night one viewing party at OS NYC, which is a gaming lounge in New York City. Actually, really awesome gaming lounge where you play like anything, board games, video games, like arcade. It's actually insane. I was like, oh, this is cool. So we are hosting night one of WrestleMania. There, I'm doing that as a joint event with XVPW, Extreme Virtual Pro Wrestling, and he's doing his WrestleMania for his show, and then we will be watching night one of WrestleMania, and there will be nice, cool, awesome things and drinks and food, and a panel, I think, of an after show there, I believe, and so that's pretty cool. So that's like the immediate what's happening, and if any other panel comes up, I'm not sure yet because I didn't get. If I say randomly, oh, there's another panel, yeah, then that means I got an email that I got accepted. But that's the currently set schedule is what I have going on.
Yeah, lots of all kinds of amazing stuff. So I'm so happy you were able to come on my show. So thank you so much for that. And I'm really grateful for your presence in my life. And everything you encouraging that you've said to me. I'm really grateful for it. So now that the show is wrapping up, let me just say that you can find and follow me, your girl Stephanie Hardy, on Instagram and Twitter at Queen Steph Hardy. And you can also follow the Hardy Wrestling Podcast on Instagram at Hardy Wrestling Podcast and on Twitter at Hardy Wrestle Pod. And you can follow me on Twitch on Stephanie_Hardy4. And also follow the Facebook page, which is The Hardy Wrestling Podcast as well. And follow me on YouTube at The Hardy Wrestling Podcast too. And subscribe and ring the bell so you can be notified every time I have a new video or a new clip out or whatever. Because I am putting a pedal to the metal this year, this coming year when it comes to content. You're going to see my face more often. It's not just going to be audio stuff, it's going to be audio and video stuff. So please be on the lookout for all of that. And like she said, like, we have LA Comic-Con coming up and I'll be a panelist for that, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. So please be on the lookout for that as well. So until next time, thank you guys for watching on all of the platforms, and until next time, bye y'all.